Good evening, everyone, and welcome to AstroNights Live. Once again, we have a fascinating presentation planned for you, and we're very excited that you chose to spend a little of your time with us tonight. Our presentation will be about 20 minutes in length, after which we'll be able to address a few of your questions. Those of you participating on Zoom can post a question via the Q&A window, but be sure to hold your question until the end because it just might get answered during the presentation itself. If you're joining us via YouTube Live, you should know that Q&A is not available, so just sit back and enjoy. Whether you're joining us on Zoom or YouTube, we recommend taking a moment to locate the full screen mode in your app for the best AstroNights Live viewing experience. All of the websites and resources we'll be discussing during our program are available on our website, so don't worry about rushing to write them down. Just relax and enjoy the program. The links will be waiting for you whenever you're ready. You'll be invited to complete an online survey at the close of the program, and we hope that you will take a moment to share your thoughts with us. Your feedback helps us in planning the future AstroNight Live events. And now I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Mary McDonald. Mary is the planetarium manager at the FSU Planetarium, and I know she's anxious to get started. Mary?
Thank you very much, Brenna, and welcome everyone to AstroNights Live. The event tonight, it has been titled Mars 2021. We had a difficult time figuring out a title for tonight's event and how to describe it because we knew it was going to be scheduled for the day after the Perseverance rover landing. And of course, that's why we scheduled it at this time. But we also knew that that landing was not guaranteed to happen successfully. So we didn't want to call the event Perseverance Lands at Mars or something like that. So we just went with Mars 2021 because we wanted to focus on the future of Mars exploration, and whether that would include the Perseverance rover or not. Well, today we're all breathing a sigh of relief that the landing went spectacularly well. And we'll hear more about the status of the mission at the moment from our guest speakers tonight. And I'd like to briefly introduce them now. Tonight we have Maya Nasser and Eric Hinterman, who are both students in the PhD students in the Aerospace Engineering Department at MIT, working with Professor Jeff Hoffman on MOXIE, which is an instrument aboard the Perseverance rover. So thank you so much, Maya and Eric, for joining us. And in just a moment, we will be turning it over to them. But first, because this is AstroNights, we are going to take a quick look at the current night sky. So let's switch over to that. And let's take a look. All right, so you are looking at the sky that looks not that much like what you saw around sunset tonight. It's pretty overcast here in New England if you're joining us from New England, but were we to have clear skies, this is what you would have seen around sunset. So let's let the sun set, and as you may have guessed, we are going to be looking out for Mars in the night sky. And there is actually a reason why you might want to look at Mars in the night sky when talking about this mission. So we're going to go forward to about 7:30 p.m. It'll be nice and dark by then. And we're going to find Mars. Ooh, I went a little too far, but that's fine. So take a quick look at your night sky visible on screen right now and see if you have some ideas, some possible candidates for where Mars might be in the sky. I promise you it is visible at the moment. And I'm going to go ahead and point it out. Don't worry, this isn't a quiz or anything. I'm going to point it out and then I'm going to show you how it's actually pretty easy to find if you know what to look for. So Mars is right here. And there we go. I'm gonna throw a label on it. Now let me, yeah, that should be readable for everyone. Great. Okay, so I'll give you some clues on locating Mars in the real sky in just a moment. But I do just want to quickly quote one of the other MIT team members, Mike Hecht, who is the principal investigator for the MOXIE instrument and the associate director of MIT's Haystack Observatory. So he was asked a few weeks ago on planetary radio, is the excitement building? And this is what he said. Oh, absolutely it is. And one thing that reminds me every evening, and I encourage the audience to follow up on this, you walk out in the evening as the sun goes down and you see Mars glowing bright and red, almost outshining Jupiter in the sky. And that's how you know there's a mission on its way to Mars. That's how the orbital mechanics work out. So I just heard that, I heard his interview, and I thought I should mention that. Just thinking about all these people on the team for the past few months since July, I'm sure that all of them have been looking up at the sky and looking at Mars each night and just having that lovely reminder that the mission is underway. And what he means about the orbital mechanics is that Mars has been really bright in the sky for the past few months. And that's because Mars, around October, when Dr. Jeff Hoffman was with us, Mars was near opposition. And that is when Mars missions are planned. They're planned around opposition, which is when Mars is closest to Earth in its orbit. So not only does that mean that Mars is extra bright in the sky, it means that the distance between the two planets is at a minimum. So when you do see this bright, beautiful Mars in the sky, not just this year, but every other year going forward, you can be pretty well assured there might be a mission on its way to Mars. So that was October when opposition occurred. And so the way the orbital mechanics works is you do want to launch a little bit before opposition, and then the landing will be a little bit after opposition. So we are a bit past opposition now, and therefore Mars is not as bright as it was in October. So it might be a little bit more difficult to find, but right now we have some really useful nearby objects in the sky that could help you identify it. So the first, of course, is the lovely first quarter moon, very close to Mars right now. And last month's AstroNight, I'm going to talk up our past content. Last month's AstroNights was all about the moon. And then just next to the moon, you see this interesting little cluster of stars. And in fact, that is exactly what it is. It's a cluster of stars known as the Pleiades. And we actually did an entire AstroNights all about the Pleiades the previous month in November. Yeah, going way back. So that one was, I liked that one. It was a little bit of an advanced AstroNights, which I don't often do. Okay, so now those are two really, really easy to find objects in the sky, and you can see that Mars is very close to them. Just really quick, I'm going to put up the date and time in the sky. So yeah, so this is the 19th at 6, all right, 6:44. I think I had wanted to go a little bit later. All right, ignore the time for now. But what I wanted to show, take a look at the date, and let's jump ahead by 1 day. So we're going to jump forward 1 day, and we're going to see that Mars is going to be in a different position with respect to these objects. So obviously the moon is not in the same position, but the Pleiades will still be nearby. So let's jump back to tonight. And I want to also mention that around Mars, some of you may have noticed a few other objects that maybe you thought were Mars because they had the same distinctive red color. So Mars is the red planet, and it is red for very specific reasons. It appears red to us, but there are lots of other red objects in the sky, and we're going to take a look at a couple of them. So Right next to the moon, look for this little V shape right here. And this is the constellation Taurus. And Taurus is the bull. And the bull has this, in mythology, the red eye. And this is a star known as Aldebaran. So it's red like Mars, but totally for a different reason, because it's a star, not a planet. And then just moving on a little bit east of Taurus, we have the constellation Orion. And let's dip the sky a little bit to get a better view of Orion, which in the real outside sky would just mean look up a little higher. Orion has a red star as well in the shoulder of Orion right here. This is the star Betelgeuse. And it's a great constellation to look at to see the different colors between stars. I will tell you that we do kind of oversaturate the colors with the planetarium software. So the colors are a little bit more exaggerated than you'll see in the real sky. But a good way to really see the difference between the colors is to look at Orion and look at the difference between Betelgeuse and like the belt stars, which appear pretty blue. So that is a quick look at your night sky. And the last thing I want to say is that these two stars, Aldebaran and Betelgeuse, they appear red because they are a certain type of star known as a red giant. And it's not just a type of star, it's actually a certain phase in the life of a star. And the last thing I want to say before we leave the night sky is that next month's AstroNights is all about a star's life. That's the title of next month's program. So you're going to learn about how stars go through a life cycle. And for some of them, it ends up in this phase of the red giant phase. And it's pretty cool that you can look, in one region of the sky, like the constellation Orion, and you can see quite a few of the phases of life all together in one place, like a multi-generational family photo. All right, so with that, I am going to just go ahead and stop sharing, and I am gonna turn it over to our guest speakers, who I believe have their own visuals to share. Maya and Eric, once again, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much for the introduction. We're both super excited to be here, tell you more about Mars 2020 and the mission that we landed yesterday. It's extremely exciting after yesterday's landing, so we're really happy to be here. Eric, if you want to go to the next slide. All right, so I'm just going to give a brief introduction about myself, then hand it off to Eric to introduce himself and kick it off with a few slides. So I'm currently a PhD student. My name is Maya Nasser, and I'm originally from Lebanon. I came to the US to start my bachelor's degree at MIT in 2014, and I've been working on MOXIE all the way since 2016 till now. So it's been an amazing experience working with this team and to really see it land on Mars yesterday. I'm also very involved in various non-spacey or non-Mars activities in space law and politics and international advocacy and an entrepreneurship clubs. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm going to hand it off to Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. My name is Eric Hinterman. I went to Notre Dame for my undergraduate degree. And as you can see here, I played saxophone in the marching band and the jazz band. Got to travel all over the country with the football team for that. And it was a really great experience. I love Notre Dame. And I did chemical engineering, actually. So I'm now an aerospace engineer, but originally I was a chemical engineer. And I worked in the chemical industry for a few years after graduating before coming back to MIT for my graduate degree. But about 4.5 years ago, I did come back to MIT to work for this guy, Dr. Jeff Hoffman, who I believe did an AstroNights a little while ago. I work on the MOXIE experiment, as you've already been told, and this is just a picture of me at JPL from a few years ago with the heat shield when it was first being integrated in the clean room at JPL. I live in an undergraduate dorm as a live-in graduate mentor, and so that's me in the T-Rex costume. I like to have fun with my students and hopefully also give them some good life advice along the way. And this is just a cool picture of our advisor. Both Maya and myself both work for Jeff. This is a picture of him in space. Okay, but what we are going to talk to you about today is, of course, the Perseverance mission. We're going to talk more specifically about MOXIE after that, as well as our roles on the operations team, which officially started yesterday after landing. First, I think it is a good idea to go over the past Mars rovers that the US has landed on the surface that have sort of led up to Perseverance. We're always increasing in capability, and Perseverance is just the latest in a line of amazing rovers that have gone to the surface. So some of you may know this already, but the first rover that was landed on Mars successfully was the Sojourner rover back in 1997. And it took pictures, it was successful, it didn't travel very far. I always tell people that its top speed was 1/60th of a mile per hour, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around because we walk at about 2 to 3 miles per hour. So try walking 200 times slower than you currently do. And that's how fast that rover was able to move. Nonetheless, it accomplished its mission and did a great job. But in 2004, we launched Spirit and Opportunity, or landed Spirit and Opportunity on Mars, which were twin rovers. They were built in the same manner, but were sent to different parts of the planet to do their own exploration. And these both had a really great life and accomplished a lot for us on the surface. So really briefly, I'll just show you one of Spirit's major accomplishments was capturing the first ever footage of dust devils on Mars. So this is a bunch of images that the rover took on a plane on Mars. And you can see when you stitch them together, you get this sort of video of these little dust tornadoes going across. And it was things like this, when you discover this on a new world, it's pretty amazing to see something like this for the first time. But perhaps even more exciting, depending on who you're talking to, was one of the major discoveries by Opportunity, which was these, what they call blueberries, these little round rocks that you see. The right picture is a zoomed in version of the left picture. And what these are hematite-rich rocks that we think were formed by flowing water. When we see these on Earth, it's always a result of flowing water that can form them, both their shape and their composition. So this was a really huge discovery for Opportunity because it pointed to the fact that as far as we understand this geology, there was flowing water here in the past on Mars. And of course, water is exciting for a variety of reasons, but most importantly, because on Earth, where there is water, there is life. Unfortunately, both of these rovers have met the end of their mission. Spirit back in 2011 got stuck in the sand. This is a picture from the back of that rover. And you can see this wheel actually, it just got stuck in the sand and couldn't dig itself out. And unfortunately, that meant it couldn't point its solar panels in the right direction. And it just slowly lost power and eventually wasn't able to keep itself alive. But it was an amazing mission and lasted well beyond its initial planned timeline, accomplished a lot. Opportunity did even better in terms of longevity and ended up having over 15 years of service. But just a couple of years ago, almost to the day, Opportunity was essentially declared, the end of the mission was declared because of a global dust storm. This is a simulated view from Opportunity looking up at the sun from Mars' surface over the series of several days. And you can see as the dust storm moved in, the sun gets dimmer and dimmer until you can't even see it in this last panel. And because Opportunity was also solar powered, this meant the end of its mission. It was not able to keep itself alive after that. But again, great missions, and they led the way to the rover that most of us know, which on Mars, which is the Curiosity rover. And that landed in 2012 in Gale Crater. Besides being much larger than the other rovers, much more capable in terms of the science instruments that it carried on board, it also was the first rover that in this series that was nuclear powered. So it does not rely on solar panels and therefore could avoid some of those issues that we saw with the other rovers. This looks really similar to the Perseverance rover and that just landed on Mars. And that's for a reason. Curiosity has been very, very successful and done a great job for us on Mars. And so we took a lot of the team that built the Perseverance rover took a lot of the successful design from Curiosity and basically just upgraded it for the Perseverance rover. So that's what we're going to talk about today is for the next few slides at least, is the Mars 2020 mission, which includes the Perseverance rover. And there's three main objectives to this mission that NASA put out. The first is to seek signs of past life, and we'll get into the geology of the landing site, but we're really excited to begin exploring that landing site to look for signs of past life. Another is to set aside a cache of samples. So the Perseverance rover has a drill, a coring bit, that's actually going to take rock samples that are about 2.5 inches long by 1/2 inch in diameter, little cylinders, and store them in test tubes, essentially, and then eventually drop a bundle of these test tube samples on the surface of Mars for a future mission to come and grab and bring back to Earth. So that's very exciting. And then finally, another mission objective is to prepare for human exploration of Mars. And there's a couple instruments on board that do that, but primarily that's MOXIE, which is what Maya and I work on. Being able to produce oxygen on the surface of Mars is very important for future human exploration, and that's what we're doing. This is just a picture of the rover, Perseverance. You can see it's got this 7-foot long robotic arm. It's really a beast. It's kind of hard to tell the scale of this thing, but it's really a very large rover. And it's very capable. MOXIE sits right up here in the front right belly of the rover. And you can see over in the back is where the nuclear power system is. You've got a bunch of cameras on top, and it's carrying a whole suite of other science instruments inside of it. And my last slide before I pass it back to Maya, I'm going to talk about those 7 science instruments. So a rover on Mars it's basically a vehicle to carry science instruments to the planet. So what it's doing is it's driving around Mars to carry these 7 science instruments so that they can each do their own thing to characterize different parts of Mars geology or the Martian past, or things like ISRU with MOXIE, making oxygen. And so I'll throw them all up here. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but META, right here in the middle, you see META is taking samples and characterizing the atmosphere. So it's going to give us pressure, temperature, dust information about the atmosphere over the course of a Martian year. SuperCam actually shoots a laser and vaporizes rock, and then it can measure the resulting plasma from that vaporized rock to determine the composition of the rock before it got vaporized. And so that's a way to do remote science, because it can shoot that laser and characterize rocks from up to, I believe it's 20 meters away. It might be 20 feet away. We're right down here with MOXIE. Again, I said we're going to talk about that later. Maya's going to give you more of a detail about it, but we're going to produce oxygen from the Martian atmosphere. And there's a bunch of other great instruments on board as well.
All right, thanks so much, Eric. So as Eric mentioned, in our MOXIE project, we are working on making oxygen on Mars. So let's talk a bit about why do we do that? Why is that important? And what are the benefits we get? To send anything to space, a lot of you might know, is really expensive. So if we're talking about sending 1 kilogram to low Earth orbit, we're talking about $3,000 to do that. So if we're going to send humans to Mars, we want to get those humans at some point back to Earth. And in order to do that, we want to be able to get them off the surface of Mars via something called a Mars ascent vehicle, which is what you can see in the photo here on this slide. And that would take them back, to another spacecraft that would take them back to Earth. But in order to do that, if we want to actually, use the fuel, it's consistent of fuel and oxidizer, we have to carry it right now, everything with us from Earth. So if we're talking about a Mars ascent vehicle of a launch mass about 40,000 kilograms, about 22,700 kilograms of that is going to be just pure liquid oxygen, which is a lot. So if we're talking about 1 kilogram to low Earth orbit, $3,000, and then to Mars, you're talking about you need 15 kilograms in low Earth orbit, that would give us about more than $1 billion in order to just, have fuel and oxidizer for this Mars ascent vehicle. So this is really, really expensive. So the other workaround in order to do that is to actually use what we call in situ resource utilization, which is referred to in short ISRU. And the idea behind ISRU is really known as living off land, which basically means you go and produce the propellant on Mars instead of carrying it with you all the way from Earth to go there. And you can think about it in a way, if you're going backpacking, if you carry everything with you without you before you even start, it's going to be really hard. It's going to have to carry a lot of things. You're limited by what you can have with you. But if on your way you go fishing and fending for yourself, you can stay for a lot longer and not have to carry with you as much stuff going. So that's in a nutshell kind of what ISRU is. And on Mars, luckily, we have a lot of material that could be used for propellant production. So we have a lot of atmospheric CO2 in Mars's atmosphere. We have ice water under the surface, and we have hydrated regolith, which all could be used in a way to produce propellant. So it makes a lot more sense economically in order to do that rather than carrying things with us. In MOXIE, in our project, what we're doing is really using the CO2 in the atmosphere in order to produce this oxidizer for to be used as a propellant. So the way we're doing this is by what we call MOXIE. So MOXIE stands for Mars Oxygen ISRU Experiment. This is going to be the first time that we demonstrate ISRU on a different planet. And the idea, as we said, is to produce oxygen out of this atmospheric CO2. And MOXIE, just to reiterate, is a demonstration of technology. It is not, the full version you would need for a human mission. But since you can't, send something for a human mission that has been untested before, this is kind of the first time we demonstrate that on the surface of Mars. Currently, the plan is to produce about 6 grams per hour of oxygen at greater than 99% purity. And in order to, if you have a human mission, we're talking about 2 to 3 kilograms per hour to support such a mission. So again, this has to be scaled up a lot for upcoming missions. And the process in order to do or to produce this oxygen out of CO2 is called solid oxide electrolysis, also known as SOXY. So I'm not going to go into the full details of that in the slide, but basically it's the idea of doing something like a reverse fuel cell and be able to remove the oxygen molecules out of the CO2 that we have from the atmosphere. And as you can see here, the atmospheric composition of Mars is more than 95% CO2. So it makes a lot of sense to make use of that. Next slide. So in this excitement to Mars. So where's Perseverance now? So the next slide is a photo of, or a GIF of the launch. This happened on July 30th this summer. It was a really exciting moment. And yesterday just made it a lot more exciting that we actually landed on Mars. But this happened and about, normally missions to Mars take about 7 to 8 months to actually arrive on Mars. So if you go to the next slide, Eric. This is a video of the entry, descent, and landing of the spacecraft into Mars. So you can see here the spacecraft is approaching to entry to the atmosphere. And this is the heat shield that you can see on top.
And this is what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, which is crazy.
Yeah. So it's right now. As the spacecraft enters the atmosphere, it heats up a lot. So as it increases its heat, it kind of slows down, enters the atmosphere, and enters inside of that to go to Mars, as you will see in the upcoming photos. And then as it's entering, you can see at some point it starts to slow down, and afterwards it opens its parachute. So the parachute at that point slows it down even more, and it starts going on its way down. And this time it's really interesting in entry, descent, landing, since the spacecraft, the rover, has what is called relative terrain navigation. So it can actually see photos of what's going on Mars to know its landing location more properly, which is different than Curiosity. And here you can see we got rid of the parachute, and the rover is going down. And the last step in this entry, descent, landing process is when we're a bit closer to the surface of Mars to avoid any destroying of the actual rover when it actually lands. We use what is called a sky crane, which you're going to see in a bit, which basically is a couple of cables that the rover is lowered down on in order to land safely on the surface of Mars. and after which we can see that the touchdown has been confirmed or not. And this just shoots back to the atmosphere. So that's kind of the 7 minutes of terror, what they're known now for entry, descent, and landing, because we can't control what's going on in real time. You've got normally about 11 minutes of delay in communications when you send something to Mars. It changes depending on the location you have between Earth and Mars, but you have to do everything autonomously, basically, and you just know the results if you landed or not a bit after a delay. So it's always a 7 minutes of terror, any mission to Mars. Yep. Yeah, and these are some super cool photos that you can see. The photo behind is the one in my background. So these are super new. We got them from the rover yesterday. You can see the top ones are from the hazard cameras of the rover, and those are a bit covered with dust on the side. And what you see below is a super cool image. It was taken by HiRISE, which is a high resolution imager on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, I think. And it took this photo. Basically, if you zoom in, you can see the parachute of where the rover that you just saw in the EDL video, and you can see the rover right here at the bottom, and this is while it was on its way going down to Mars. So it's a really super cool image that we're all super excited about in the morning.
Yeah, these pictures are hot off the press, and
yeah.
I gotta say, it's really a pleasure to be able to start seeing new photos come in every few hours.
Exactly.
Amazing.
And this is another photo taken. You can see here the cables. This is the sky crane that you saw before. It's going down on Mars. These are the cables that it's lowering the rover down to surface, basically.
Yeah.
So it's a really super cool image. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Eric to talk about our landing site on Mars.
Okay, I'll close us out. I want to talk about where exactly we are on Mars and why we decided to go to that place specifically. I'm going to start it out with another video, and I'm going to play this. So this is just an overview of Mars, and what you're going to see is it's just going to do some false colors so you can see composition and also elevation. So we're up in the northern hemisphere of Mars, about 18 degrees north latitude, right outside of this giant basin area. We're in this little, it looks little, but we're in Jezero Crater. Jezero Crater actually is quite a large crater, and you'll see here from some satellite imagery what we call this our landing ellipse. So this circle that you see on the ground is the projection of where we would land. And indeed, we ended up landing, I'll point it out with my mouse, about right over here in the ellipse today, or yesterday. We project these landing ellipses because we can't be entirely certain, at what specific point we will land on Mars, but we can be 99% sure that we'll land within a certain range. And that is our range. It's actually fairly large though. Our landing ellipse is about 10 kilometers across. I'm gonna I need to think about if that's right or not. Yeah, I believe it's 10 kilometers across, and you'll see that in the coming slide. So it's actually a huge area, and we were all kind of wondering, where are we actually going to land in it? So we're just starting to figure that out in the past 24 hours. It's zooming in a bit here, and in this 3D view, what's cool is you can see the crater rim. So we are inside of a crater, and you can start to tell that the crater walls are actually fairly steep. So we plan to explore Jezero Crater, the base of it, drive around for quite a while. We'll do a lot of different science inside of this crater. And this is just showing some paths that we might take. But eventually, be it a few months from now, a year from now, a couple of years from now, it is very likely that we will exit the crater. So we'll find a path that is not too steep for the rover to handle, and we will follow that up and out of the crater and move on to explore some other part of Mars. So this mission, it's going to be exciting every day, especially when we move into new phases, like climbing out of this crater. Okay, let me jump back to the PowerPoint. All right, so yes, my 10 kilometers was correct. So there's our landing ellipse, and this is, again, just an bird's eye view of the area. This is Jezero Crater here with this black circle, and it's going to zoom in on that familiar satellite imagery. The really cool thing about Jezero Crater, so first of all, it used to be an ancient lake, we believe, on Mars. We believe a few billion years ago, this was full of water. And that's one of the things that makes it very interesting. You might ask, how do we know that it was full of water? Well, first of all, it appears that there's a river that flowed into it. And you can see this, out here, it's called these inlet valleys. But in the satellite imagery, you can see this basically canyon that was carved out of the crater wall. And what's even more exciting about it is we have a delta. So on Earth, a delta is essentially when a river feeds into a lake or an ocean. And you get this sort of structure here, which is sediment that was carried downstream by the river and kind of shoved out into the lake or into the ocean. The great thing about that is it basically gives us information about all of the surrounding area outside of the crater, because the river took sediment from all the mountains, all the hills around the area, and condensed them, concentrated them into this one, the single few square kilometer area in this delta. So we're going to be driving around this delta, taking a lot of samples, doing a lot of science, because it tells us about the greater area surrounding Jezero crater. This is just a little animation. It might be a little bit laggy of the rover and its robotic arm. So this will show you how we take some close-up images. There's a couple different cameras mounted on this robotic arm, and also the drill, how we end up taking an actual core sample once we find a rock or sediment that is interesting enough to be worthy of one of the samples. The robotic arm essentially extends that down. It'll take some photos, and eventually, if we want to, it'll turn over and take a core sample. Okay, we got just a couple slides left. So here's a rough timeline, jumping back to MOXIE. So take off the geology caps and the rover driving caps, back to MOXIE with how we actually make oxygen. We are going to be, we landed yesterday, and we do what's called an aliveness check and then a health check on Mars. And in order to make sure that MOXIE survived landing, and in order to make sure that it's working properly, we have to do these two checks before we actually end up making oxygen. We hope to make oxygen in the first couple of months of the mission. That's not actually set in stone yet, and I can't say a date or anything like that, but hopefully we'll make the first oxygen on Mars soon. After that, or potentially before that, there's also a helicopter on board called Ingenuity, and that's going to be doing about a month of checkouts and flights early in the mission. Beyond month 2, that's when we start exploring. We'll drive around Jezero crater. We'll find interesting places to go, hopefully discover a lot of cool new things. And we'll leave it with the last slide, which is about our role on the operations team. So both Maya and I work on the operations team for this mission, and we started yesterday. But of course, we've been training for this for quite a while. I work on the uplink team, which means that I essentially validate and package commands for MOXIE that are sent from Earth to Mars to command MOXIE to make oxygen, do its aliveness check, etc. And so that actually can get sent straight to the rover. Sometimes we might use orbiters to relay it, but it can also go straight to the rover. And then Maya, you want to talk really briefly about downlink?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to be reading the parts of the downlink that we get from Mars. And the idea behind it is we're going to get data from Mars. We have to basically change it to units that we really can understand. So we call those engineering units. We do this conversion. We afterwards process the data, and we look at it in order to see if our runs on Mars were healthy, if we had any errors, if we had any faults, if something went wrong, and kind of do a preliminary analysis of what we get and report, if our run was healthy and if we're a go or no go for upcoming runs that are going to happen afterwards. So it's a very interesting role, and it is very exciting to be able to get hands-on the data that you get right away from Mars and being able to analyze it and being able to get results and make conclusions out of it, because that's kind of the fun part of the process, is actually getting results out of Mars and making sure we can operate and we can produce oxygen as planned, which is kind of the goal of our project. So
yep, and we uplink about once per day. It's actually once per Martian day, which is a little bit longer than an Earth day. And then we downlink several times, up to several times a day, because we use several different satellites that are orbiting Mars to relay that information. And one other note, I have these arrows pointing at Australia, and there's actually a reason for that. We use the Deep Space Network through NASA, and that's essentially 3 giant telescope arrays that are located around the world. One is in Spain, one is in California, and one is in Australia. So whichever one has line of sight to Mars, to where we need to be, that's the one that we'll be using. Oftentimes it's 2 of them. So I think, Maya, are we good to end it there?
Yep, I think
Good
that's
question.
it.
I'll go
I'm
ahead.
happy to take any questions.
Yeah, but thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. That was fascinating. And for the audience, okay, questions are coming in. So you can start putting questions in the Q&A area. And basically, just in the interest of keeping them moving along, I am just gonna direct them to one person, maybe go kind of back and forth. And I really love some of the questions that we're getting already, which are very much about Moxie. And I'm gonna start with just, I'll send the first question to Maya. It's a very simple question, which I think, you explained, but maybe you could just go over it in a little bit more like simple terms, which is, how will Moxie create oxygen?
Of course. So the process that we use is called solid oxide electrolysis. And you can think about it as, if you know what a fuel cell is, as a reverse fuel cell. And the idea is you've got a cathode and an anode side. You take the CO2 and you apply voltage on it. And when you do apply this voltage, you can take oxygen ions that could go through one side of the cathode to the anode and actually be, the oxygen would be oxidized, and you can go all the way to the other side and produce oxygen. In order to do that process, though, you need to start out by a couple of other steps before that. So Moxie basically takes the atmosphere, CO2 from the atmosphere, filters it out of the dust. That's kind of the first step, because the air on Mars has a lot of dust. So after it does that, it kind of compresses it, because we need a way higher pressure to operate. Yep, this is a really useful slide for that. But so the first step, we filter this air, we compress it to a way higher pressure. Then we pass it and heat it up, and then pass it afterwards through this process that you're seeing over here. So we have a stack of 10 cells connected together, and you can see how the CO2 molecules here are being changed into CO and O2, oxygen ions, basically. And these oxygen ions are to go through this electrolyte and on the side of the anode produce oxygen. So that's kind of in a nutshell the process. And then afterwards, we take these produced oxygen and CO, and we kind of measure them through composition sensors to, make sure the purity of the gas that we're getting, make sure the flow rates that we're getting. And afterwards, we're not storing them this time. So we're gonna just let them go into the Martian atmosphere at the end of that.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, that was a twofer, yeah, because other people were wondering where the carbon goes. Great. So I'll send the next question to Eric. Will the rover be able to do anything with the oxygen Moxie produces? What will happen to it?
Can you say that one more time? Sorry.
The question is, will the rover be able to do anything with the oxygen that Moxie produces? What will happen?
No, it will not be. So we are making oxygen as a demonstration to prove that we can do it on Mars, and that we can do it across an entire Mars year at different times of day and different seasons. But right now, the oxygen on Moxie just gets vented to the atmosphere. So we measure it, like Maya said, we determine what purity and flow rate we made, and then we send it out into the atmosphere. It's such a tiny amount, it's not going to change the atmospheric composition of Mars in any appreciable way. But the reason that we are not storing it is because, again, the purpose is to prove this out. Now, in a future system where Moxie would actually support a crew of astronauts, we absolutely would capture the oxygen, and we would probably liquefy it and store it in large tanks so that they could use it for breathing and for rocket propellant.
Okay, great. The next question I'm going to ask, I'm going to have both of you respond to. I'm going to go to Maya first. How is working in operations as a PhD student? Does handling operations become a part of your research?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question because we're just starting doing that. So for the last many months, we've been doing kind of practice operations in order to make sure that we're ready for actually operating on Mars. So we've done a lot of, simulations of how do we send things up to Mars, how do we receive things back, how do we do the analyses. It's definitely a very unique opportunity to be able to do that as part of our research, even if it won't necessarily be the topic of our, PhD degrees. It's still an amazing opportunity to be involved in that. It could, on the part, to give you more details about operations, right now we are operating on Mars time, which basically means our schedules really shift in order to, follow the time on Mars. And this could potentially mean we're going to be nocturnal in a bunch of times, operating, working at night and sleeping during the day, which could be, as a student, a bit, conflicting with classes or things like that. But it's definitely one of the, most unique experiences to have as a grad student doing that. Eric, if you want to talk about your.
Yeah, I'll just add to that and say it's the chance of a lifetime. So really happy to be doing it, even though, again, it's kind of like having two jobs. You have your operations job and then you have the PhD thesis that you need to write. I haven't worked on my thesis for a single minute this entire week. I'll be honest. Now that's not sustainable. And that'll start to shift, but this was a big week for operations, obviously. And so, it's just managing two different projects at once, basically. It's very doable.
Now, because of the late out, as it's getting a little bit late for perhaps a 5-year-old, I want to get this question out there in case bedtime is approaching. This is from Joe Kearney, 5 years old. And I leave it to either of you to answer this. Did the Moxie team eat peanuts for good luck too?
I did. I kind of wanted to keep the tradition going, so I had my my box of peanuts next to me. It worked here, so the peanuts didn't fail us this time. But yeah, I tried to keep the tradition and have them.
If you weren't watching the live broadcast of the landing, they discussed that for the past few Mars landings, there's been a tradition in mission control of eating peanuts for success.
Yep.
I liked that one. All right, so I will go to Eric for this one. How confident are you with Moxie succeeding? And I like this question because it shows that you understand that success is not just landing on Mars. It starts now, really.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a sequence of events that take place, which we kind of mentioned. We have an aliveness check where we just turn Moxie on and off and see if it survived. We have a health check where we run some of the systems, but not all of them. And then we have our first oxygen. And I think if we make the first oxygen, if all three of those go successfully, we will be very happy. And I think Moxie will be declared a success. Obviously, our full mission intent is to run many times and make oxygen across an entire Mars year, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day. And so for the Moxie team, success will be if we can actually demonstrate that and do it over the course of a year repeatedly. I'm very confident in it. One thing that helps my confidence is we did an aliveness check on the way to Mars. So when we were flying through deep space on the way to Mars, we pinged Moxie and it survived the launch, which is a very good sign. Obviously the landing is, it's a bumpy ride on the way down and something could have gone wrong, but we'll know about that pretty soon. And I'm confident that the rover team that packaged Moxie and put it inside of the rover did a great job and did all the testing that they needed to make sure it survives. So I'd say I'm very confident. I'm not just saying that because I'm giving a presentation. I'm actually very confident that it'll work.
Yeah. And just to add on that is, for anything that goes to space, everything is, being tested in labs and being simulated in Martian operations, but Mars is unpredictable. And, we're all crossing our fingers and hoping after all the tests that things are going to be the same and we're going to be able to, successfully operate. But we're confident that working, but at the same time, Mars is unpredictable and you never, we can't, know that, a priori. But as Eric mentioned, our hopes is to be able to operate in sampling basically a big range of atmospheric densities, and that could happen in multiple seasons and parts of the day. And hopefully also maybe proving that it works in a dust storm, for example, to kind of prove all operating conditions that we can produce oxygen in them.
And I should clarify, I'm nervous about, the only part I'm nervous about is the landing, not the technology itself. MOXIE's been tested and developed for a decade now, and we've proven it very reliably on Earth. So it's more about, did it survive than will it work? Because we've been demonstrating it for years on Earth that the technology works.
I'm so glad to hear that. All right, I'm going to give this question to Maya. I know you've been doing, you mentioned to me, a lot of talks, especially talks aimed at kids in the last couple of days. So the question is, what made you want to do this, and what advice do you have for kids?
That's a great question. So I always wanted to be an astronaut. That is kind of, most of us who are interested in space, this is kind of how it starts. And I was always interested in space, but growing up in Lebanon, it was really hard in order to find any opportunities to work in the space industry. So when I was in high school, I was watching the Curiosity landing in 2012. And I was at that point, still in high school in Lebanon and trying to find opportunities of what I'm going to do next. And throughout that, a couple of years later, I applied to MIT, to the US. And after I got accepted, it was kind of one of those moments that, hey, now I can actually be involved in the space field. And, having Curiosity landing and watching it, I say that multiple times, but the last director of NASA JPL is Dr. Charles Lashi, who was originally a Lebanese, scientist, and now he's Lebanese American at this moment. But it kind of always inspired me to have someone originally from Lebanon who was involved in the space industry, especially leading such Martian missions, which gave me, something to hold on to when I came to the US. And being involved in MOXIE now and in March 2020 was just an incredible experience in order to be able to do that myself. So yeah, in a nutshell, I just love space a lot and love all its aspects, from the science and engineering to the law and politics, and hopefully working to becoming an astronaut at some point.
Awesome. I'm going to send this one because this probably is something that a lot of people are wondering about. It's kind of a big picture question. I'll send this one to Eric. Why are we trying so hard with Mars? Is it because it's the most maybe habitable planet that's the closest?
Yeah, I love when people ask me that. If you think about the options so this is all under the assumption that we want humans to go out into space. Some people believe that we should never leave the Earth, but if you do think that we should go out and explore, obviously the moon is by far the closest, and we've been to the moon, which is great. We're trying to go back. But if you look beyond that, there's really not many options. So Venus is the closest to us, but the surface of Venus is 800 degrees Fahrenheit. It rains sulfuric acid, and it's got the pressure equal to the bottom of the ocean. So there's no way the humans will survive on the surface of Venus anytime soon. It's really not a great place to go. Further in is Mercury. It's very close to the sun. It experiences extremely high and extremely low temperatures, depending on which side you're on. Really, it's not viewed as habitable. But then you go the other direction, and there's Mars, which is not too far away. It's just outside, I believe, of the habitable zone, as they call it in solar systems, to the point where it's very close to being able to support liquid water on the surface with the temperatures that it experiences. It's got a lot of land area, about the same land area as the Earth, actually, even though Mars is smaller, just because it's not covered in oceans. And we think that there was liquid water there in the past, and that it was covered potentially in oceans, just like the Earth is now. If you go beyond that, of course, then you hit Jupiter, which is a giant gas giant, and doesn't really have a surface to speak of. So just by process of elimination, if we want to go somewhere, Mars is kind of the obvious answer. But beyond that, I think the thing that really drives people towards Mars is that we're getting more and more evidence that it used to be like Earth a long time ago, with potentially oceans on the surface, maybe life on the surface. That's what we're looking for. And so that's something that just naturally draws humans, is that it kind of used to be like Earth. We should go there and see what's going on.
Great answer, yeah. So I have a couple more big questions that I maybe want to save for the end. So I have a simple one that I'll hand this one to Maya, but I feel like you guys should be the one to answer this. Where is Moxie located on the rover? So you might want to bring up the picture or something.
Yeah, if you can reshare your screen, I can also do that, Eric. So Moxie is located in the belly of the rover. It's on the front right-hand side of it. Let me share the presentation and open it. If you have it opened, Eric, you can, yeah. Yay. Yep, so you can see over here, this, oh, go back. There you go. So here at the bottom, you can see here Moxie. So it's at the front right part in the belly of the rover located.
You can't really see it because it's embedded inside all of the metal frame, but it's in there.
And I'm just going to add on to that. So it operates from inside there. It doesn't have to be like deployed out or anything?
Nope, it operates from there. It does have an inlet for the air from the atmosphere, which goes from the outside, but it's operating from inside of the rover. And it's covered, if I'm gonna just show Eric one photo, I can insert here. So if you can see this photo here, you can see the actual payload, Moxie, being dropped into or being placed inside of the rover. This is way before it was launched when the rover was still being assembled at JPL. And as you can see, it is basically coated with gold because we heat up a lot inside of Moxie, and in order to protect the instruments that we have next by and the rover, having this gold cover basically protects us from, it's kind of a thermal sheet. It doesn't allow as much heat to go outside of Moxie to the other instruments.
Okay. Oh, there's so many awesome questions. All right, I'm gonna do maybe two more. This one was asked early, so I forgot about it. I'll send this one to Eric. Do you lose the uplink when Mars rotates the side away from Earth? Yeah, I mean, just general, like, yeah, uplink, like, does anything stop the uplink, I would say?
Yeah, we have to uplink at a specific time each sol, or in a specific window each sol. So that puts the pressure on a little bit, which is good. It keeps our meetings on track. We can't delay too long or we'll lose line of sight and not be able to transmit. In an emergency, if there was one, we could use the orbiters and almost always find a route to get a signal to the rover, even if the planets are turned away from each other, so to speak. But in general, yes, each day, we have a specific time window where we can uplink.
Okay, for the last question, I'm going to go to both of you, and you can interpret it however you want. The question is, if Moxie works, what's the next project? So you can interpret that as meaning for you or for Mars in general, whatever you want. Maya, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so for Mars in general, if we prove that, you know, Moxie works on Mars, this is a big step for any future, preparing for future human missions to Mars. So as you all know, in terms of Mars in general, the next step is to basically use the samples that were produced from, or not produced, were collected by the Mars 2020 rover, and in the upcoming Mars sample return mission, return those samples back to Earth to further study Mars. So that is a big step in the upcoming, you know, next steps in Mars. But if we're preparing for future humans on Mars, and if we were able to prove this correctly, works on the surface of Mars, the next big step is really scaling it, which Eric is going to be helping us to do in the future. But basically, that's kind of the next step for being able to send humans to Mars, and maybe testing and demonstrating other technologies of using the ice under the surface of Mars to produce methane, and that way you can sustain even more things for the future. So these are the next steps. Personally, if it works, that would mean I'm gonna have a better PhD thesis because we will have better data from Mars in order to analyze. So it's gonna be really exciting for sure when we get the data from our oxygen runs.
Yeah, and I think just to summarize that, because Maya gave a great answer, the next step would be probably send a version 50 times larger than MOXIE to the surface and actually make oxygen and store it and maybe demonstrate that we can combust fuel with it. Then the next step would be to send a full-size system to Mars. So it'd be about 3 or 4 times larger than that intermediate step, and actually make enough oxygen to support a crew of astronauts. So I'm all in favor of just jumping that middle one and going straight to humans to Mars with the larger version. I think that NASA and some other people might say we need to do an intermediate step to be safer. And then beyond that, once we have humans on Mars exploring, it's like Maya said, then you start to figure out how to have them there longer and have more people there by starting to dig up water ice and utilize that, actually produce the fuel and not just the oxidizer on Mars, so that we can save even more money with ISRU and, you know, start exploring Mars to a greater extent. So it's in the plans. NASA commissioned MOXIE with the intent to scale it up to support humans. So that's the good news. It's in the plan. We just have to make it happen. Maybe some people on this call can be a part of that in 5 or 10 years to help us make that happen.
Wow, you guys have it all figured out, and it's just awesome to see. I think it's been a great sort of sequence to go from Jeff's presentation, Dr. Hoffman, back in October, and then seeing literally the next generation of Mars explorers in action. So I think it's been great for our audience to see both of those presentations. So, some people may have been at both, some people were only at one. Everyone can go back and watch the other presentation, and tell your friends to watch both of these, which will be on our YouTube channel. So I have just shared in the chat that everyone should visit tonight's event page for resources related to tonight's event, including all the cool, Mars 2020 mission pages and visualizations and games and everything you can play. So check that out, and we may even add more as we go along. I know there were some questions that we didn't get to. I say this every time, but we really are working on a project of saving all the great questions that our audiences ask, and maybe doing a big question day one day. So if you didn't get your question answered, we have it still. So thank you so much for joining us. Eric and Maya, thank you so much, and good luck. I feel like I can say good luck now. I didn't feel like I could use those words before the landing, but good luck on the next Martian year of science and exploration, and on your PhDs and future journey.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
All right. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you next month.